Please take your seats. As Nigel said, my name's Pastor Dave, and I'm looking forward to opening up what God has to say to us this morning. So please do turn back in a Bible. If you've not got one with you, you might find one in the seat in front of you, a green Bible. And we're in John 10, which you'll find on page 1076. While you're doing that, I want you to imagine being in active duty. You're on the front line with threats from the enemy. It could be one of those dreadful trench scenes from World War I, or perhaps a modern-day equivalent. I was speaking to a UK serviceman, a logistics officer in the RAF who had done a 6-month tour of duty in Iraq. And his role there was to deliver hostages who had been taken by ISIS and other groups to be used as bargaining chips. And he explained the stress of the role, the stress that it had on his body, on his mind, such that to the end of that 6 months he was exhausted. He said he was on hyper alert as rockets were launched over his head. And he said that towards the end of his time there, he would sleep in his body armor. The daily threat that was having that toll on him, I can only imagine. Now, the people who have faced that or are facing that, they do that to defend us and sometimes even die for us. And that helps us with this passage that was read to us by Bethany about the Good Shepherd, because we see the same things in him, those themes of defending and dying. So let's think about the first one of those things about the Good Shepherd. Firstly, he defends. He defends you. Look back with me to the passage where Jesus likens us to sheep. We've heard about goats in the children's talk. Now we're thinking about sheep. And sheep need defending. There's a number of threats which are mentioned in this passage. Verse 1 and 8, just before the passage that we read, it talks about thieves and robbers who might come for the sheep. We had some friends recently who were away on holiday, and while they were away, thieves came into the house. They took the car keys and both the cars. They took all sorts of things, jewelry, which had sentimental value. And they even, quite oddly, took a pack of sausages from the freezer. Well, some things don't change, do they? Back in Jesus' time, this would have been a threat. If you owned sheep, it was possible that people would have come. They wouldn't have taken your sausages, but they would have taken your lamb. Later in the passage, there's another threat. It talks about wolves. There's hired workers who are mentioned, and their role, they were paid to look after the sheep, but they were only really there for the money. Then they weren't willing to put themselves in danger to defend the sheep. No, they abandoned the sheep when they're needed most. But there's actually more going on in this passage than these ideas of sort of agricultural theft or people who aren't really doing their job properly. People at the time would have seen something richer in this picture that Jesus is painting. And they would have got that from the Old Testament, where the leaders of Israel were known as shepherds. So here, Jesus isn't giving advice to farmers. Instead, he's making an accusation about the leaders and what they should have been doing. You might turn to Ezekiel 34 this afternoon. I'll just read out a few sections for that, which describes the religious leaders, the people who should have been defending God's people. It says in Ezekiel, "You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally." Can you see what Jesus is saying then? Those old problems have not gone away. Now, that passage in Ezekiel, it goes on to say, "I will rescue my flock." This is God speaking. "I will bring them out from the nations. I will pasture them on the mountains. I myself will tend my sheep. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. I will shepherd the flock with justice." God says that he's had enough. He said, "I will defend my people because the people who should be are not. I will do what it takes to care for those who are broken, those who've been taken advantage of." And now Jesus comes to the people and he declares, "I am the good shepherd. I am the one that these verses were speaking about. I am the person who will defend you and rescue you and lead you to flourish." Now, some of the language of this passage, the kind of agricultural language, may be more familiar to some than others. But don't we recognize that we have a need for leadership like this? People who are not out for themselves. People who aren't self-serving. We see that in politics. Perhaps we see that at work with line managers who just seem to be out there to sort of climb the greasy pole of the corporate ladder. No, we need people who will lead like Jesus said he will lead for the good of others. And look how Jesus is described in verse 3. It says that the sheep listen to his voice. It says he calls them by name. This isn't a sort of aloof, distant person. No, Jesus is close. He's got an intimate relationship with every one of his people. And he doesn't send them to places where he's not willing to go himself. No, he leads them. He leads them to these lush meadows that are described, exactly what sheep need. Now, before Churchill was Prime Minister, he was actually Home Secretary. And on one occasion, you can see him here on the picture, the second person in. On one occasion, there was a siege in London. There was a group of Latvian revolutionaries. At that time, Latvia was part of the Russian Empire, and they'd formed a gang in London. They were an armed gang, and you can see here him dealing with the situation. He was commended for the way that he handled it. He was on the scene. He wasn't in some office somewhere, but ready and supporting those men. And of course, Churchill became famous for that kind of leadership in the war. He wasn't someone who would appease when it looked difficult or surrender to evil regimes, but someone who gave his all for his country and their values. Now, Churchill had his faults, and some of his views later may well be questioned, but can you see that here he points to the sort of leader that we do need? One who is ready, one who is willing to be counted to defend his people and willing to do everything for those that he loves. Isn't it an encouragement this morning to hear that promise from Jesus that he will do that for you? If you're in the darkest valley, he says he will protect you. Whatever dangers, stresses, pain, or challenges that we face, Jesus says he will be with us. Perhaps this morning you're feeling that acutely, and you need to be reminded that Jesus knows, that Jesus is with you and Jesus defends you. But that's not all he does. Secondly, Jesus is the good shepherd because he dies. Firstly, he defends. Secondly, he dies. He dies for you. Verse 11 says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The contrast is in what the good shepherd does compared to these hired workers. These ones who flee and desert when trouble comes. Those who flee to save their own skin. Instead of that, Jesus lays down his life. He gives himself for the sheep. Now, when we think about a shepherd, certainly I sometimes think about that, we might think about it a bit sentimentally. Bit like the picture on the back of this scene, on the back of the screen. We might think about this sort of idyllic view where you've got sheep sort of bleating in the background and the sun is shining. Recently, I enjoyed watching the program All Creatures Great and Small about the vet, James Herriot, and his adventures in the Yorkshire Dales. Or maybe we imagine someone sort of clutching little lambs that are being fed. But the reality was that being a shepherd was a pretty grueling job. It was tiring. It was dangerous. It was a manly job. In 1 Samuel, David describes fending off a marauding bear. Now, you don't see too many of them in the Yorkshire Dales, do you? Now, this was a job which required proper graft, and there was danger involved in it. And Jesus is picking up on that here when he says, he will die for the sheep. Jesus lays down his life in a way which is part of God's plan. If you look down to verse 17 and 18, it's God's plan that Jesus would give his life for his people. Think about the soldiers who landed, especially early on in the first D-Day landing. The ones that cleared the beach so that others could come behind them and take back enemy ground. Those men gave their lives for a purpose. The loss of life was tragic, but not in the sense that it didn't achieve anything. And the same is true for Jesus. He gives himself sacrificially for the sake of others who would come behind him. For those who would trust in him. Like we heard in the children's talk, Jesus died in order to bear our sin, to deal with our sin, to remove it so it's as far away from us as the east is from the west, it says in the Bible. Now, he offers his life to bear that punishment that we deserve from a God who is good and holy and just. And so Jesus bears that sin and he takes the consequence upon himself. The consequence of us turning away from life and light to death and darkness, Jesus bears for us. And that is the essence of Christianity. Not that we have to sort ourselves out in order for God to accept us. Just think what Jesus would be saying if that were true. If we had to earn our salvation, he would say something like, I am the good shepherd. If you are good, you will be my sheep. But he doesn't say that, does he? Now, that is more or less like every other religion other than Christianity. But Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. I will do everything so that you can be forgiven and lead you into pastures which are good. Not because of what we have done, but because of what Jesus has done. Today we remember those who have gone before us, who have paid the ultimate sacrifice to bring peace and freedom. Now, so it's a beautiful thing to remember that. But it points to this, doesn't it? It resonates with us because it points to the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus made, laying down his life to bring eternal peace and full freedom from sin and death. There may be some of us here who look back and they wonder whether those who have gone before us, how effective their sacrifice has been. I don't know if anyone saw the veteran on This Morning Britain on Friday. He questioned whether the sacrifice of those who died had been worth it. The studio host, Kate Garraway and somebody else, they were shocked. But whatever you think about that, Jesus' death can never be questioned. The result was exactly what he desired, exactly what he intended, because he knew that by giving himself, he would rescue his people, he would bear that cost, and that he would bring them life and that eternal peace and full freedom with him forever and ever. He also knew that he could lay down his life, but also he could take it up again. It says that in verse 17. That points to the fact that Jesus would die on the first Good Friday, but then rise again. He would conquer death in order that we could achieve everlasting life. Jesus is the Good Shepherd because he defends and he dies. But there's one more thing I just want us to see in this passage about Jesus. In fact, if you cannot see what I'm just about to tell you, it probably suggests that you don't fully understand who Jesus is. He defends, he dies, but finally, he divides. Now that doesn't sound like a good feature, does it? No one wants division. Division is negative, isn't it? Don't we want a Jesus who is including all people and just bringing everyone together? Why would we want a Jesus who splits people up, who divides people? Well, the Bible describes the world that we live in and not the world that we might like to live in. I should add that my job is not to make the Bible palatable, but to teach the Bible as it's given to us, as God speaks, as he reveals himself to us. So just look down at the reaction to these words from Jesus talking about being the good shepherd. Look down to verse 19. It says, the Jews who heard these words were again divided. Some, it goes on to say, thought Jesus was demon-possessed. Others that he was raving mad. They were saying, you can ignore Jesus because he's not legitimate. Now, accusations like that aren't quite the same today, are they? It's more likely you would hear someone say that Jesus or Christianity is oppressive. But that amounts to the same thing, doesn't it? Jesus is not good news for you, somebody might say. He should come with a health warning. Don't get involved with that lot, those deluded Christians. Don't be taken in by them. But look down to verse 21 and judge for yourself. It says, but others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? See, Jesus had just healed a blind man, and he'd spoken about spiritual darkness and how we cannot see true reality. We cannot see God. These people, they don't dismiss Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And therefore, the question for each of us this morning is, which side of that divide are you on? Is he your defender? Is he the one who died for you? If so, then our response should be one of praise and love and rejoicing for all that he has done. That he is the good shepherd, the leader that each one of us needs, laying down his life for us. And we can come to him and say sorry in the full assurance that he will forgive us, that our sins really will be taken away from us as far as the east is from the west. But if you're not sure, listen to his voice like we heard earlier. Could it be right now that Jesus is calling you by name? He's speaking to you now. I'm real. I'm legit. Now, don't ignore this. Don't doubt that I am good. If that's the case, let me encourage you to act upon that. Now, call out to God to reveal himself to you. To open your eyes. Perhaps speak to me afterwards. Maybe pick up a copy of John's Gospel in the Bible and keep reading it. Ask questions. Can Jesus really be this good shepherd who defends, who dies for me? And if you'd like to take a step of faith today, I'd encourage you to do that things, but I'd also encourage you to sing our final song. Our final song this morning is "The Lord's My Shepherd."